Audio recording for this meeting has begun.
Good evening, everyone. This is Brenda with the Wyoming Primary Care Association. We are excited to have you join us this morning. Of course, I want to put a request out there for folks to mute their phones if you're joining us by phone. That makes the presentation just so much more enjoyable for all of us. So I'm Brenda with the Wyoming Primary Care Association, and we're excited to bring this topic to you, the webinar on human trafficking. Our presenters today, you guys are going to find them very knowledgeable and just full of so much information that they want to share. I think you'll really enjoy it. But before we get started, you may have heard that we're recording the webinar. We post the webinars along with the slides on our the Wyoming PCA's website, so you can always go back there and look or share it with somebody if you have a coworker who wasn't able to join today. We talked about muting your phones. We hope to have time at the end of the presentation for questions, so feel free to use the chat feature in this webinar platform to put your questions, to pose them, and we'll try and get to them. And then we will also forward a evaluation at the end. You'll see it, and we really appreciate you filling that out for us. Fantastic. So our presenters today are Kara Chambers and Tiffany Dickie. And Kara, she's on the line with us. Kara is the Director of Division Victim Services for the Office of the Attorney General. Kara came to the division in 2011 after leaving her role as a Senior Assistant Attorney General for the Tort Litigation Division of the Wyoming Attorney General's Office, where she had worked since 2006. During her time in the law office, Kara represented the Wyoming Department of Health, the Department of Family Services, the Attorney General's Office, Division of Victim Services, as well as numerous other state agencies on their contract matters. Tiffany is our second presenter today, and Tiffany has worked as an RN at Cheyenne Regional Medical Center since 2013. Her prior work experiences included employment at a variety of well-known medical facilities, including the Shriners Burns Hospital in Boston. Quite impressive, her CV is. In her current practice, as a forensic nurse sexual assault nurse examiner, or SANE, she has cared for numerous victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kara. Please let us know if you're having any difficulty hearing the presentation or seeing anything, etc. Kara, you're on.
All right. Well, thank you. That was quite the introduction. I appreciate it. So with that, I will go ahead and get started, and we'll see if I can actually control this PowerPoint. So hopefully you're all seeing our title slide, Understanding Human Trafficking in Wyoming, the Law, the Landscape, and What to Look For. And apparently I am a fan of alliteration, which is why I came up with that title. But I'm primarily going to give you a brief overview of how human trafficking legislation came about in Wyoming, why it was needed, and some of the background without getting too in the weeds on the law. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany, who is, of course, going to bring it all home for those of you in the healthcare field. So with that, let's go ahead and get going. So I always like to start with this slide because I like to let people know what my office does. I view us as we're just another piece of the puzzle. We're part of this whole system. Specifically, we have our primary responsibilities are, as was stated, we are a division of the Attorney General's office. And we have two sides of our house. We determine crime victims' compensation, so we're providing funds. Hello? We're providing funds to cover victims of crime with any medical, mental health, et cetera, sort of costs incurred due to a crime. And the other side of the house is that we manage state and federal funds that we grant out to 61 different service providers. So all 23 counties have a domestic violence shelter that works with domestic violence and sexual assault. And several communities have victim witness assistance and other advocacy programs that work with all victims of crime. And part of that is we monitor those programs and then, of course, do things like this and provide public outreach and education regarding victims' rights and victim services. So with that, again, I'm just trying to give everyone a good feel for what sort of services are out there, because as we're going to talk about human trafficking and what to look for and what to do if you identify a victim, you're going to want to know where to go. You're going to want to know that there are those 23 DVSA, which is, of course, domestic violence sexual assault programs, and they are the main providers who have agreed in our state to sort of be the subject matter experts for human trafficking. While we'll explain that human trafficking doesn't always involve sex trafficking, it is a big form of human trafficking nationwide, internationally, et cetera. So the DVSA programs have decided that they are the most suited to deal with that sort of victim type. So I want you to be aware there's one in every county. Also wanted to let you know that we have 12 victim witness, that's the VW. Of course, I'm with the government, so I speak in acronyms, that are housed within prosecuting attorneys' offices, and then we have 11 that are housed with law enforcement agencies. We have actually now only 2 independent victim witness programs, one in Goshen County and one in Teton County. We, of course, have advocates with the Board of Parole, the CASA, which are the Court-Appointed Special Advocate programs. We have 3 specific child advocacy centers should you encounter a victim of domestic minor sex trafficking, so that is with a child. Those child advocacy centers are in Laramie, Casper, and Jackson. And then we have SANE programs, and I believe we've upped our number from that. Tiffany, who's presenting in the second half, is one of our SANE programs, and we have one in Sweetwater County. But there are SANE nurses throughout the state. And then our pilot project, we have one family justice center that is located in Rock Springs, Wyoming. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what sort of service providers are out there if you are working with victims. So why we are having this discussion is because it is certainly a hot topic. But it has been a topic long before we've identified it as human trafficking per se. But in 2000, the Federal Trafficking Victims Protection Act was really a sort of pivot into how federal law enforcement, state law enforcement looked at combating this term human trafficking, which can be considered modern-day slavery, and sort of what tools they had to prosecute traffickers, protect victims, and sort of prevent this sort of crime through these types of education programs. And so we look at the 3 Ps of prevention, protection, and prosecution. And since 2000, obviously you can see that Congress has maintained its support, and we've reauthorized that bill 4 times, most recently in 2013, which happens to coincide with Wyoming getting state-level human trafficking. So before I talk about that, I want to point out that Wyoming kind of had the dubious distinction of being the 50th, as in last, state to enact state-level human trafficking laws. And I like to joke that we just let everyone else figure it out first, and then we, perfect it. But the reality is, it was slow coming, and it was hard to get state legislatures to recognize that this wasn't just a federal issue, that this can be a very homegrown issue, and Wyoming certainly needed the tools to address trafficking that occurs in our state that might not necessarily leave our state. So just for a point of clarification, so if a crime occurs in one state or a victim is transported from one state to another, that then becomes federal, because we are crossing state boundaries, and there's what's called the Mann Act, and federal prosecutors are able to capture those crimes and those victims. So to an extent, the federal human trafficking law was quite important, but nonetheless, there are definite scenarios that we will give you that represent the need for state-level legislation. So when I was approached to work with Representative Kathy Conley from Albany County to work a bill for state-level human trafficking in 2012, one of the resources I went to, and I realize this slide is blurry, I apologize, but you can kind of get the gist. So we used this slide, and you can see these are hits to the human trafficking hotline number between 2007 and 2012. And while it's sort of hard to see the state boundaries, we all kind of have a gist for where Wyoming is. And, you know, there's some dots, and there's clearly that orange and red that you can kind of see that you can just imagine is I-25 coming up from Colorado as a corridor that had a lot of activity and reports of activity. So this was one of those ways of saying, all right, folks, this is, whether it's starting here or ending here, it's certainly going through here. There are victims here, and we need to have all of the access and resources that we can to address this. So I also used the second slide, which says, how does your state rate on human trafficking laws in 2012? Now recall, this was prior to our 2013 laws being enacted. So we are one of the faltering four, and this slide is also blurry, and I apologize in advance. That's what happens when you have subpar cut and paste skills. But we are one of the faltering four. Wyoming, Arkansas, Montana, and South Dakota were the four states that either didn't have any legislation at the time or had inadequate legislation. I believe actually at the time of this capture, Wyoming was the only state that didn't have anything. Apparently Polaris Project, which is a nonprofit group that works to end human trafficking worldwide, and they are the ones who support the human trafficking hotline. They are the ones who grade all the states. You'll also see most improved was Massachusetts, South Carolina, West Virginia, and Ohio. Those were the four states before us. So the 49th, 48th, 47th, 46th state. I recall going to a presentation in Massachusetts where they were shaming themselves for being the 49th state to have state-level legislation, and I got to, hey, I got you beat. We're Wyoming. We were dead last. But you can only go up from the bottom. So by 2014 report, after we successfully passed state-level human trafficking legislation in Wyoming, we were one of the most improved. So, yay, Wyoming. One of the ways that this Polaris Project scores the states is you can see that there are tiers, Tier 1 being ideal, and then there we are, Wyoming, one of 11 states in 2002 at a Tier 2. And I will let you know that Tier 2 is very respectable. Some of the things that kept us from being a Tier 1 state were things that we've slowly been addressing in our legislation. For example, at the time of the original 2013 legislation, we didn't have asset forfeiture ability in human trafficking cases, and we can talk about that or not. Some of the other things that other states have done that our legislature and some of our tourism and travel folks were scared of, quite frankly, were posting human trafficking hotlines in every hotel room and every bar and things like that that were just not something that was adopted in Wyoming. So anyway, we went from nothing to something. We are up to Tier 2, and we stay there to this day. So without going into too much detail about the law, because I wax back and forth between giving you slide after slide after slide of our human trafficking statute and realizing that this is mostly professionals in the healthcare arena. I don't want to drone on and on any more than I already am. So we're just going to kind of do this fast and furious because I really want to leave time for Tiffany and questions that you may have. So with that, real blanket nutshell, in a nutshell, there are two types of human trafficking. I sort of alluded to that. One is forced labor, and the second is sexual servitude. And hopefully that is pretty self-explanatory. We talk about forced services, and so forced services can mean labor or sexual services, to be clear. But I wanted to write out the elements of how we define forced services and why these are the elements of human trafficking. So we have, that it causes or threatens to cause serious harm to a person, that someone may be physically restrained or threatened to be physically restrained, that there are abuses or threats of abuse of the law or legal process, whether the trafficker knowingly destroys, conceals, removes, or confiscates any actual or purported passport or other immigration document, or any other actual or purported government ID, engages in blackmail, or causes or threatens to cause financial harm. So what we're talking about in this portion of the statute are all the different ways traffickers use to coerce the victims. I wouldn't really say cooperation, but how they keep them in this situation and how they are, quote unquote, enslaving these people. There's different types of traffickers, and I think Tiffany will go into some of the different ways that victims are lured into this, usually on false pretenses. We can go with B, where someone is perhaps kidnapped and forced into human trafficking, or we have, A and E, where someone may threaten someone that they know or engages in blackmail, that I have this info on you and you're going to do what I'm asking, etc. We also see, especially in the labor arena, where immigrants, especially non-documented individuals, can be particularly susceptible to this because they are not aware of their legal rights, and perhaps a trafficker who's, especially in either avenue, whether it's labor or sexual servitude, could be using their immigration status to keep them in that situation, maybe brought them over to the country under false pretenses. We've seen cases where individuals are solicited to come over and be a nanny, and they come and the person says, well, I paid for you to get here. You have to work off this travel. I'm keeping your passport and ID until you work off, X, Y, and Z. And usually it's not necessarily being a nanny. It could be forcing them into sexual servitude or some other form of forced labor. So that is probably, I could go on, but I think you probably all have the gist. All right, so Commercial Sex Act, I think we all could probably figure that one out. Anything where a value is given, so it's not necessarily just money, but it's in exchange for a sexual act. And that definition covers both adults and children. I have this slide and I have this video, and I'm praying it will work, but I also wanted to briefly touch on the three real elements that we look for in trafficking before we watch this video. So we have the action of trafficking, which means the recruitment, the transportation, the transfer or harboring or receipt of these people. So we have the action of bringing someone somewhere for the purposes, and so and then the means. So we talk about action, means, and purpose. So the action is bringing the person there. The means is all those elements of coercion that we talked about, whether you're using force, deception, coercion, abuse of power, or that individual's vulnerabilities to sort of keep them there. And then we talk about the purpose, which is always the goal of trafficking, is that it's exploitation. And it can be any form. Again, our law talks about forced labor and sexual exploitation. But I will let you know that Polaris Project has identified, I believe, 30-some-odd different unique types of trafficking. I believe they're talking about nuanced types of labor or sex trafficking. But in general, where there is a will, there is a way. And people will use trafficking victims in any numerous avenue. So with that, and Kathy, you may have to help me, but I'm wondering if I click on this link, it will launch the video, or
it should work for you, Carol. Go ahead and try it.
Are you guys seeing what I'm seeing, or do you see the blue campaign?
The link. It hasn't turned over yet.
Well, can you do it? Because I clicked on it and it just opened up a new page.
Okay, so we see it on our screen now.
You see the blue campaign?
Uh-huh.
All right, and so
that's the wrong link? It's the wrong page?
no, it should be.
So there's labor
Do you have the
trafficking.
general awareness? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, that is not the link that I thought. Well,
Not one of these that you want to pull?
it's not doing what I thought it would do. I guess what we can say to the audience is that here is the web address for the video. It was specifically for first responders. I thought it was quite helpful. So to let you know, Department of Homeland Security has taken on what's called the Blue Campaign. And if you can do see that screen, you can see that there are general awareness videos. Looks like they have labor trafficking, sex trafficking. I'm wondering if they haven't just updated their site in the interim of me developing this and getting there. But I would just encourage you guys to explore the site. It has a lot of info, resources, awareness material, just an excellent resource for you guys to use. You'll see there's, about the Blue Campaign, what is human trafficking, identifying a victim, law enforcement support, etc. So there was bound to be something that didn't work, and that is fine.
I'll go ahead and close that for you, Kara.
Yeah, go ahead. So with that, of course, the mantra from Homeland Security, not just for terrorism, but for any crime, is if you see something, you should say something. And wanted to make sure that we had this slide with the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, and it has the number or the text info, which is Be Free, as an amazing resource. And again, we monitor, well, we don't monitor, but Polaris will routinely send us information on the hits in Wyoming and what sort of victims are accessing services that way, and whether it's forced labor or sexual servitude. That is how we identify victims. And so, again, I realize I've breezed through a lot of this and probably have left a lot of gaps, but I really believe that Tiffany has a lot of the detail. We didn't want to be too duplicative. I typically train with law enforcement and attorneys and sort of have a quite different presentation, so I've worked with Tiffany to try to tailor make this presentation for healthcare presenters. And so with that, Tiffany, I think I'm going to turn it over to you. And the moderator can decide how we want to do questions, if we want to save them, however you guys want to proceed. I am wide open.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kara. I think, so we make sure we get through all the content, and we ask folks to pose their question in the chat box. And then that way we'll be sure, and if we can't get to them, if we actually can't answer them, they'll be captured, and we'll be able to then answer them at a later time and send it back to them. So I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany. She's set and ready to go. And thank you, Kara, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kara. Good morning, everyone. This is Tiffany speaking now. Let's see if we can get this going. Okay. So my presentation is very much focused on the medical perspective. As a forensic nurse, we have kind of a multidisciplinary team that we work with, from primary care to emergency room physicians to urgent care, law enforcement, etc. So I tried to gear this so that it would be pertinent to the many providers that would treat it. And if I could just ask you to please be sure that your phones are muted, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. So human trafficking, this is a national crisis. It is a national health care crisis and a worldwide health problem. In today's presentation, just to kind of give you a goal set here, I want to hopefully convey to you by the end of this presentation understanding and a continued definition of human trafficking. I know Kara has already given us a great introduction there, so I'll just kind of add to that. I want you to be able to consider the risk of trafficking with regards to the patients that you are seeing. Do they fit that risk factor category? Help you to have a better understanding of how to recognize human trafficking victims, how to act appropriately, and how to support them, refer them, and then also how to support your fellow providers through this process. Okay, so some things that we'll touch upon here is, again, what is human trafficking? We'll review some statistical information, and then, of course, is human trafficking really in Wyoming? Yes, absolutely it is. Kara's presentation definitely touched upon that and affirmed that situation. Why is healthcare making a difference? What is it about our role as healthcare providers and other providers in the community that is so vital to intercepting human trafficking victims, and what resources are actually available for the medical providers and for the victim. So what is human trafficking? Here is the United States Victims Protection Act. I'm not going to read this to you. You can go ahead and read that through if you wish to. We already talked a little bit about the Wyoming statute and went through a great understanding of what that is. One of the biggest components of this that we all need to keep in mind as providers and as people in the community is that human trafficking is vastly underreported and very difficult to track statistical information on. The majority of human trafficking victims do not just come out and say, hey, I'm a victim of human trafficking. A lot of them do not understand that they actually are a victim until they have gotten some, gotten away from the situation, and that if somebody actually affirms what's happening to them is wrong, many of them, this is their normal. And it happens, on a daily basis, and so they don't recognize it as easily. Human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery. They may lack basic freedoms. Most people that are victims of human trafficking do not have basic freedoms. They can't go to the bathroom when they want to. They may have to have permission to shower, to bathe. They may have to ask permission to sleep, where they can go, what they can do, what they can wear, who they can see. So it's a very complex a process and a very complex issue. So the very first thing that is important to address, a lot of times people what is smuggling versus what is trafficking. There's two separate components here. Smuggling and trafficking are not the same thing. So if someone is, for instance, trying to get into the United States illegally and they pay a set rate and they are smuggled in the back of a truck across the border, etc., or they hire someone to bring them through and then they are set free of their own free will to do what they will, that is smuggling of human beings. Trafficking is a different component. Trafficking is when, for instance, in that same scenario, if someone is trying to go somewhere illegally and they are smuggled over and then brought into a trafficking situation where we're going to hold your visa, we're going to hold your passport, you owe us more money now, we're going to make you do this, this, and this. That is not always the scenario with trafficking, of course, and we'll go into the different types of trafficking later, but I just wanted to touch on that so that you have a good understanding of what is trafficking versus smuggling. So there are key components to human trafficking. There is the victim, there is the buyer of the services that the victim is forced to provide or coerced to provide, and then there's the third-party control.
So let's hold for just a second,
Yes.
Tiffany.
There is.
Yeah, let's go ahead and make sure everyone's phones are muted.
Yeah.
Mute everybody. We're gonna go ahead and just mute everyone, and you'll only hear Tiffany. Yep, we'll do it on this end.
You have been muted. Your microphone has been turned on.
We should be good to go, guys.
Okay.
Thanks, Tiff.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to touch upon some types of human trafficking. Like Kara said, the Polaris Project has actually identified many more subcategories of human trafficking, but these are the basic subtitles, so to speak. There's labor trafficking, and the top 3 types of labor trafficking are domestic work. For instance, people are, working in the home or in, hospitality situations. Think of, who are the people that clean your hotel room? Who are the people mopping the floors at that local restaurant, etc. There's agricultural labor trafficking, the people that are picking, in the fields, many of our fruits and vegetables. There's been quite a few busts on labor trafficking in the United States in the last couple of years. And then there's traveling sales door to door. I don't know if any of you have encountered, particularly in Cheyenne, I've noticed in the last couple of years that I've had quite a few door-to-door salespeople coming to my home that are clearly not just like your local college student or somebody that works in town trying to sell something, for instance, magazines or subscriptions to books, etc. Then we have the subcategory of human trafficking for sex. The top 3 are escort services. A lot of times you'll see this as an illicit massage situation, and then there is businesses and then residential locations that are involved in this. So you may see, for instance, on the side of the highway, I don't know how many people on here are near the Cheyenne, northern Colorado area, but as you drive up through I-25 there, right before you hit the Buffalo Ranch on the right-hand side, there's a hotel, and it actually says in a huge sign, it says massage. There's been many times that I've driven by that, and that is a business advertising massage therapy at a hotel location. So those types of places can kind of raise some red flags. Just so you have a basic idea of the main human trafficking locations overseas, a couple of other countries that hit big on these numbers as well as the United States are Mexico, Canada, the Philippines, and the UK. So this isn't just a United States issue, this is a worldwide issue, but we will focus mostly today on what's happening in the U.S., although a lot of this information does kind of cross borders for us. So recruitment and how does this actually happen? So top tactics of sex traffickers. A lot of times this is something that is involving an intimate partner or marriage. Believe it or not, there are actually websites out there and underground communities out there where they have, pimp out your spouse, etc. There are some very complex situations where people are being photographed without their knowledge and then by their intimate partner, and then that information is being sold online, and then it's being used as bribery for other types of services, and so they are brought into human trafficking that way. A lot of times you'll hear these young people say, particularly young girls who are caught up in the sex trafficking trade, well, he's my boyfriend, he's my husband, we have a kid together. They don't recognize that they are actually being trafficked because this person is their intimate partner and perhaps the only person throughout their lifetime that has actually shown any interest in taking care of their physical well-being, even though they are actually sacrificing their physical well-being throughout this. One of the main themes that I have been seeing recently when dealing with human trafficking, particularly in our state, is that there is a lot of connection between familial human trafficking, specifically of children. A lot of children, adolescent girls are being sold, adolescent boys as well, are being sold by extended family members, possibly by their own parents. It's a very complex issue that involves some very deep emotional connections that keep them in that ring. A lot of times people will pose as a benefactor in order to bring somebody into human trafficking. So come to the United States, I will, help you to further your education. We'll help you to do this, this, and this, and we'll help you get a job. And then, a lot of times girls are brought in, and young men are brought into the United States on modeling contracts, and then it's not what they expect. There's a lot of false promises and fraud that are involved in this, and that kind of goes without too much further explanation. Many times it's a job offer, like that modeling contractor or whatever have it be. Come work in our. A lot of times it's with regards to strip clubs, bars, etc. Come work as our bartender, and then you see that gal over there. She's making a lot more money than you can as a bartender. Why don't you do this? And then they get a hold of the recruiters get a hold of some personal information, and then there's bribery. And so it kind of accelerates into sex trafficking. The top tactics of labor traffickers, a lot of times it's a job offer. Come and we'll give you a good job, we'll pay your way, we'll help get your family here, we'll provide you with a location to live, and then the victim accumulates some form of debt, whatever it be, whether it be time, finances, transportation, that they can never seem to pay off. Well, you were sick yesterday, or your family took too much time, doing what they needed to do, and so now you need to work for us an additional amount of time, and so that can be a very complex dynamic there. Some false promises, fraud is also a huge part of labor trafficking. Labor trafficking can be familial as well, using family members, young members of families or even old members of families to work at no profit, at no benefit to them directly, simply out of coercion. And then with labor traffickers as well, there's often the posing of a benefactor, specifically when you're talking about smuggling of human beings and illegal human trafficking. Victims that are coming in through the United States, they will have somebody that's posing as their benefactor. It seems like they're going to help them, and then they are drawn into a labor situation. So risk factors and methods. How do these traffickers hook these people? So a lot of risk factors here, recent migration, relocation. A lot of times people, this is not just immigrants. This is not just people that are coming into the United States. The majority of human trafficking victims in the United States are actually American citizens, believe it or not. So a lot of times these people will be, particularly of a low socioeconomic situation. They may be traveling for work. They may be homeless or between jobs and moving here and there. But that's not always the case. So keep that in mind, just a little caveat there. Many times the risk factors of this involve substance abuse. So young people particularly will be drawn in as drug smugglers or dealers, and then they will become addicted to the substances that they are dealing, and then their benefactor or what have you will then draw them into labor trafficking, or more often with regards to substance abuse, sex trafficking. Runaway and homeless youth. It is a huge risk factor if a young person is in foster care and runs away. It's actually estimated that about 25% of these young people are picked up if they run away from foster care home. About 25% of them will be picked up within the first 24 hours by a human trafficker. And so that is a huge thing that we need to know as providers. If these people are coming into our clinics or to our emergency room, or even those brought in. A lot of times we'll see homeless youth or young people brought in for, jail clearance. Keep in mind that if you are seeing some of the red flags, which we will talk about later, that you may be seeing a victim of human trafficking. So many times there are some risk factors regarding mental health. Our mental health population is very vulnerable to coercion, and we need to keep that in mind. Unstable housing situation, like I said at the beginning with recent migration, relocation. If there are people that are moving in between homes, in between states, living in their car, that is a huge risk factor. So how are these people hooked into human trafficking? There's a lot of emotional abuse that's involved in this, particularly when you're talking about the situation where there is an intimate partner situation there where, oh, he's my boyfriend, or she's my significant other, or, she's my adopted mom, or whatever. It can be very complicated with regards to the emotional abuse, and these people are truly dehumanized over a very lengthy period of time. It's not something that happens instantly, but it's something that starts off very slow and then accelerates. There's economical abuse that's involved, so manipulation of money and personal goods, isolation, including confinement. Many of the victims that I have dealt with have been completely cut off from anyone that was in their life before they were human trafficking victims. Many of the people who are cut off and isolated are trying to protect their loved ones and trying to avoid anything further happening to their immediate family. That's a lot of times the way these traffickers hook people. They'll say, if you try to go away, if you try to run away, I'm going to go after your mom or your brother or your sister. And they know all these intimate details of these people's lives far more than you would think is possible. And then I talked about this a little bit already. They're smuggled, many times they're smuggled by force or coercion. So, if they're brought into the United States or they're transported somewhere, for instance, a hitchhiker on the highway, transported somewhere, then they are forced to then partake as a human trafficking victim as payment, what have you. There are a lot of threats. So more threats beyond, hurting extended family members, threats of hurting children, physical abuse. The worst of the world is really involved in all of this. So key elements of human trafficking. Kara talked about this quite a bit already. So there's the act, the means, and the purpose. So there's the recruitment, the transport, the transfer, the harboring of people, and then the receipt of persons. So there's kind of a lot of different elements to that act piece. And then, the means, which we talked about a little bit, the big key part of the means here that you need to understand is the component of coercion. These are not people that are acting out of their own free will, although many times you may hear them say, well, no, I did it because I wanted to. Well, did they really? Were they wanting to do this because they're trying to protect themselves or someone else? Or were they wanting, quote unquote, to do this because they were fearful of their safety or their lives or their livelihood? That is coercion. That is not free will. So just keep that in mind there. And then the purpose. Exploitation here is the key component of the purpose. So these people are being exploited for whatever reason, whether it be labor or sex. And so that is slavery, and it needs to be recognized as such and treated, as such. So some statistics here, and I tried not to totally bog you down with this because there are so many numbers that we can go. But first caveat is, like I said at the very beginning, it is incredibly hard to track these statistics and this information because the vast majority of human trafficking victims, A, do not admit to being or self-identify to being a human trafficking victim. At B, there's a lot of fear and coercion that goes along with being a human trafficking victim, and so many times they do not report. So these are actually some hard numbers that we have available, but they are far lower than the reality of the world, because what is truly happening is far greater than this. So in 2016, the number of calls to the national hotline, the Polaris Project hotline, which we saw in Kara's presentation, was that 7572 number. So those are people that actually called in, whether they be self-identified victims or people who were concerned, you know, I've got this neighbor next door and there's a lot of these people coming and going from their house, and, you know, what do I do, that sort of thing. So hotline cases between 2007 and 2016, that's that 31,659 total number of calls to the hotline. And then based on the hotline, these are the breakdown statistics for sex, labor, sex and labor, and then unspecified. So you can see at the very top is the human sex trafficking, which was 73% of the calls. So, and I touched on this a little bit already with regards to the foster care system, but you know, you see that average at the very bottom. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit here. The average age of girls entering human trafficking is between the ages of 12 and 14, and the average age of boys is between 11 and 13. This is not just girls. I know a lot of times we think, you know, girls are a lot more vulnerable to sex trafficking and sexual abuse. Yes, that is true to an extent. However, there is a whole underground community out there that, you know, is not as publicized, and the public is not nearly as aware of the fact that there are many of our young boys are being brought into this. So 100,000 to 300,000 American children are at risk of being trafficked for commercial sex in the U.S. That statistic kind of comes from that 25% will be picked up, you know, when they run away within the first 24 hours. So I just want to throw some really big numbers out there for you so you guys can have some comprehension of how big this is in the United States. So the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime estimates that worldwide overall crime actually generates about $32 billion annually. Okay, so that's all crime, illegal activity throughout the world. Okay, estimated human trafficking in all forms throughout the world is estimated to be $15.5 billion of that $32 billion. Okay, so that's nearly half of the revenue. Okay, so then in the U.S., what part of that 15.5 is ours? It's estimated that $9.5 billion is generated in the United States alone through human trafficking. And that is pretty mind-boggling. And that, again, that resource was the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime. They have a lot of great resources on their website. So I would encourage you, internet browsers, to check that out at some point as well. So here are some graphs for you. I'm a very visual person, so I like kind of seeing breakdowns like this. So sex trafficking by type of allegation, and I mostly focus, you know, these graphs on sex trafficking because of that, you know, larger 73% number on the hotline there. Adult prostitution is that 48.4% number on the top left there, and then you see prostitution of sexual exploitation of a child, that's 40.4%. That's pretty large. You know, we need to face the reality that a large component, oops, sorry, what happened? Sorry, everybody. A large component of our human trafficking victims are minors. 68% of sex trafficking, confirmed sex trafficking and labor trafficking victims are female, and 31% are male. And then you can see the divisions by race there. It's, you know, the divisions are not quite as much divided as we see like in our healthcare or in our socioeconomical graphs. You can see that it's kind of spread out. Unfortunately, we see this 40% for the Black community. That does correlate with a lot of our inner city and the foster care systems in the inner cities throughout the United States. So we can kind of see the crossover there. Labor trafficking victims, you see the 55.7% Hispanic. That definitely correlates with the number of people that we think of as illegal immigrants coming in here, working in the labor fields, in the service environments. Just keep in mind, like I said, who is that person cleaning your hotel room? Who is that person that's picking those organic vegetables at your grocery store? Many of them, believe it or not, are victims of labor trafficking, and we just need to keep that in mind. So, who are the survivors? The survivors are men, women, boys, and girls. They are everyone. They are U.S. citizens and foreign nationals. As I said before, the vast majority of human trafficking victims in the United States are actually Americans, and we need to keep that in mind. Yes, there are people that are, here illegally, or they are immigrants who have come, who are wrapped up into the human trafficking trade, but the majority of them are U.S. citizens. Many of these victims are school-age youth. So like we talked about with the boys and girls, so the average age of entry between boys and girls, just keep that in mind, is 11 to 14 years old. So these are very, very young people at the beginning of their lives, and it's a very vulnerable time for them, and so it kind of sets the tone at that age to make it more difficult for them to get out of it, because as I touched on in the beginning, this becomes their new normal. They don't necessarily recognize the true level of coercion and abuse that they are actually at. So the youth that are most vulnerable, I want you to keep in mind, are those with unstable family situations, are those who have little or no social support. So if you have a young person coming into your clinic, hospital, outpatient facility, what have you, and they are alone at the age of 13 or 14 years old, and they have no one that they can call, and they aren't identifying that they have anyone, or they are saying that their parent or guardian is not available frequently, that is someone that is high risk. At-risk children are not just high school students. They can be very young. The risk factors can start much earlier on, and so we need to be better at identifying them. So targeting of victims, how do they actually get a hold of these people? So social media is a huge target arena. Many of our young people especially are getting on social media and the internet much earlier than those of us that grew up 30, 40, 50 years ago. We didn't really have that as part of our childhood. This is part of our youth's childhood, and this is part of that world that they live in, this virtual reality world that is so much a part of their adolescence and their youth. So social media is a huge way that many of these traffickers try to hook people. Chat lines, after school programs, a lot of times these traffickers will be kind of, running off in a different facade, the perfect person that looks like they really care about youth and care about kids might be masking this hidden deep dark secret. So we need to be on alert. Many times, the victims are on the street, and so these traffickers are prowling, looking for that young person that's, sitting there with a sign saying they need a ride somewhere, hitchhiking down the highway, shopping malls, clubs, and, many times these kids, particularly, young children, 11 to 14 years old, are actually brought in through other students who recruit others. So, they might be brought in. I had one particular victim tell me, I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was in between homes, and my girlfriend and I, we were looking for, a place to stay, and she met this really great guy, and he got her this job at this club, and she got me a job at the club, and then, it kind of accelerates from there. Then he forced them to do, stripping, then he forced them to sell their body. And so, it's kind of like that scenario. A person may be trafficked without even leaving their own hometown. So, we have found there are quite a few young people, and many of the survivors, 3 different survivors I have heard speak within the last year, were all trafficked as children within their own hometowns. One of them was trafficked by an uncle who lived down the street, who used to take care of them after school, and he trafficked them out of his own home. Her parents never knew. Another was trafficked by her neighbor next door. Her mom was a single mom, and she worked long days, and her brother and sister and her, they were young kids, 14, 15 years old, old enough to stay home for an hour or two after school. Mom never knew that this neighbor who originally, was masking himself as the nice guy that would have fresh baked goods and toys to play with in the backyard, and Nintendo and that sort of thing, was actually luring them in and grooming them to be human trafficking victims. And so the other one was a gal that was actually trafficked by her own parents, her own family. And so you can actually be a trafficking victim without leaving your own hometown. It's pretty remarkable in that way. So why don't they leave? We've already talked a little bit about this, about the abuse, but I think it's very important to kind of push this issue of the dynamic. There is intense shame and dehumanization that comes with this type of abuse. There's the traumatic bonding dynamic, coercion, control. The victim has fear as well as gratitude. Their trafficker may be the only person throughout their lifetime that showed any interest in them personally, or may be the only person that has provided them with any sort of stability. And if you think of that type of dysfunctional stability, it's pretty remarkable to try to comprehend. But particularly our young people that are caught up in the foster care system, especially when they don't have any extended family or anything where they finally land when they are in their adolescence, they may not have stability. They might not have the same school. They might be going to different schools regularly. They might be moving frequently. They might not necessarily know where they're staying next week. And so this traumatic bonding of this regular provision actually makes them feel obligated. And then there's the psychosocial control. There's the survival instinct as well as the coping mechanism there. Well, he's my boyfriend, she's my mom, he's my dad. Whether or not they are actually mom or dad, a lot of times these young people will refer to a person that has taken them in as my mom or dad, for instance. And so, there's a lot of threat that goes hand in hand with that psychological control that contributes to that shame. Financial control, particularly with these people that are completely dependent on their trafficker for everything, from food to clothing. There was an instance up in Casper, Wyoming, I believe it was last year or perhaps several months ago, forgive me for not knowing the exact time frame, but where women were actually prostituting themselves on the street for McDonald's and Burger King meals. So a lot of times these traffickers will usually keep every cent that is made through the trafficking of the victim, and so many times the victim has to find other means of providing for themselves. There's threats of physical violence or confinement. A lot of times these victims, when they are finally brought in, will have a history of many physical assaults in the past, broken bones that weren't set properly, poor dental care. And we already talked a little bit about the traumatic bonding here. That kind of is, that summary there, the intense shame, the psychological control, financial control, threats, kind of all contribute to that traumatic bonding. There's a lot of times control of the movement or the family. One of the victims that I worked with, she had a child with the trafficker. He was the father, and on the birth certificate of this child, young child, toddler age, I believe, and so that child was kept away from the mother, several hundred miles away, and she was not allowed to see her child unless she fulfilled certain quotas, and so a lot of times that is a component as well. Minors they fear returning to their family or being placed in social services. So, if they are one of those runaways, for instance, or they are, a young person that is being trafficked, perhaps out of their own town, why aren't they telling their mom or dad? Well, perhaps it's related to that intense shame, fear, et cetera, like I talked about with the young gal that was being trafficked by her neighbor. How did her mom never know? And that in that particular situation, the survivor praises her mom. She said she was a wonderful mom. We always had food on the table. We had a nice apartment. We had everything we needed. And she never knew until the daughter kept it from her mom until her mother's death. Her mother never knew that happened. So there's a lot of fear and shame that goes with this, and we need to truly keep in mind that dynamic is very complex. So we already talked about a lot of these things, so I won't go into too much here. But a lot of times, what happens is these human trafficking victims are put in a situation where they are extremely fearful of law enforcement and of medical providers for the following reasons. So many of them are wrapped up in illegal activity. So they are often dealing drugs or hooked on drugs, or they might be here illegally, like we had talked about with many of the labor trafficking victims. And so they are fearful that they will not be taken seriously as a victim if they come forward for what they are actually being victimized for, because what they are also doing is illegal with regards to these other components. And so they will often not disclose, and they are often trying to protect themselves and others. I believe recently, when we saw last year Cheyenne Frontier Days, there was a human trafficking bus, all of which those victims would not disclose that they were actually victims. And so it can be very complicated. And we need to ask ourselves as providers, as law enforcement, as community members, what is keeping them from coming forward, and what can we do to help them come forward despite, their reasons for not. But the majority of times it's the fear, the coercion, and then that major concern of lack of resources once they're disclosed. So if they come out and tell you, I'm a human trafficking victim, they really don't know what they're going to get from you. Are you going to believe them? Are you going to be able to hook them up with the right resources? And so we will talk about that as well. So offender and trafficker typology. Okay, so there are really two subcategories of human traffickers. So these are not the victims. These are the people controlling the trafficking victims. And I tried to put this on here because, most people have seen these two movies, or these two, there's The Godfather here, and then there's Tony Soprano here, and know kind of that type of person. So the gorilla pimp is the boss. That's Tony Soprano, okay? That is the person that is right out there telling you like it is, and, there's really no finesse to him. It's either do it my way or fear, right? And then there's the finesse pimp, which is more kind of like The Godfather, and not that these two people, obviously, these movies were not portraying pimps, but this was, mobster movies. So the finesse pimp, The Godfather, was more, a wolf in sheep's clothing. He was very suave, very sweet talking, but you turn him the wrong way, and you're gonna get what his threats are straight out. And so I want you to kind of understand that dynamic of the trafficker typology, and keep that in mind when you have people in the exam room that you are concerned about. Some of those little red flags are hitting, standing up, and the hair on the back of your neck's going up, and you're saying something is wrong here. What is it? Do you have someone else in that room with that patient? Is the gorilla pimp really the boyfriend or the husband or the significant other or the relative that's sitting in the room with them? What's happening there? A lot of times these victims present for medical care with their trafficker present, and that trafficker is pawned off as a significant other or a family member. Who is that grandfather or grandmother or parent in the room with that young child, where that young child is not responding to them as you would normally expect them to. Just keep that in mind, okay? So this is the power and control wheel, and I have not filled this in because I want you to take a moment and I want you to look at this of the different dynamics, and I want you to think for a moment, just a little self-reflection of the freedoms that you have in your daily life. What are some of the physical freedoms that you have? The emotional freedoms, the psychological, professional, spiritual, personal, financial, medical. So, for instance, many of us woke up this morning, we may have showered, chosen our clothes that we wanted to wear to work that day, got up, made what we wanted for breakfast, driven to work in our vehicle. We might have chosen where we wanted to drop our kids off so that they could be well cared for. Perhaps you went and had some spiritual satisfaction this morning. Financially, did you buy lunch? Where did that money come from? What happens if you get sick? What do you do? So those very basic things, personal things, who can you might have gotten a phone call, talked to your best friend, you might be meeting someone for dinner. Those are all things that are free to most of us. And so for a human trafficking victim, they do not have those freedoms. And this next slide, I'm sorry, I know it's a little bit fuzzy, but you can go ahead and look on the Polaris Project Canada, and you will see they actually have several of these graphs where they filled in those things that I was talking about previously, about the economic abuse, the use of privilege, emotional abuse, isolation. These people have to think of the very basic thing of, I got up, I took a shower, I got dressed. Most of these people do not have that freedom without having some sort of caveat to it, whether it be permission or where they can shower, what they can wear, what they can eat, where they can go, can they worship, can they make a phone call, can they choose, where they're going to go that day. They don't necessarily own their own transportation. So I just wanted to kind of highlight the extreme level there, okay? So is human trafficking in Wyoming, and we can kind of skip right through this part because you'll see I have this very similar map to what Kara had up on her presentation, but you'll see right there where it's circled, if you see that big red hot spot, that is I-25 there, going right up through from Denver to Cheyenne, Wyoming. So this map, like Kara had mentioned, was formulated by the Polaris Project, and it's based on the calls into the human trafficking hotline. And so, like we had said, many of these statistics are very hard to track, but the fact that the hotline is picking up these hot spots really does correlate with what is being reported in the media and to law enforcement. So So healthcare making a difference. So we are the front line. Medical care is the front line. Nearly 88% of trafficking survivors report that they had some kind of contact within the healthcare system while being trafficked within the last 2 years. And that's according to a 2014 study. You know, if we cannot identify these victims while they are in our offices, in our clinics, you know, in our emergency rooms, in our inpatient ERs, hospital situation, dental clinics, you know, we are going to miss them. And a lot of improvements have been made to increase awareness and identification and resources, but we're not quite where we need to be. And so I'm just going to thank you right now for tuning into this, because the more we can educate ourselves, the more progress we can make. So this right here is a little video about healthcare providers and human trafficking victims, and it actually has a human trafficking victim that speaks on it, so hopefully I can get everything.
Human trafficking is a terrifying and complex topic that has many myths and misconceptions. But this modern-day form of slavery doesn't just occur overseas.
Two children are free tonight from the hands of sex traffickers in Springfield, Illinois. They were rescued as part of the FBI's sex trafficking practice. From the Metro East to St. Louis, police have busted multiple sex trafficking rings just this year.
Comment.
Lewis has been voted among the uncovered locations in the top 20.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. It seems that
We can see it on this end, but it's not coming through.
okay.
The link is there, and it'll be on the PowerPoint that we'll post on our website, if you want to go ahead and look at that.
Yeah, I think that's a great video for all providers to take a look at. It's a short one, but it kind of encompasses a lot of the key components, and you do get to hear from a survivor. And that is, I think, you know, we all need a good example for it to kind of stick with us as to what exactly are we looking for. So we'll go ahead and move on in that case then. So human trafficking is a medical diagnosis, okay? We need to think of this as a differential diagnosis. So it's as a disease, and, you know, it needs to be on there. You know, if this person is coming in frequently to the emergency department with sexually transmitted infections or vaginal pain or abdominal pain or, you know, multiple injuries or self-inflicted injuries or psychological issues, could this be going on? And I will tell you just from experience, sometimes when you look a little bit deeper, it is. So this needs to be on the backs of our, you know, on the backs of our brains and in our thoughts when we are assessing our patients. So evidence of inflicted injury, bruising, scarring, burns, broken bones, complications from, you know, attempted abortions, vaginal, anal trauma, branding or tattooing ownership. This right here is an example of, you know, what one of the branding tattoos on a victim looks like. A lot of times you will see themes, crowns, barcodes, numbers, strange tattoos, particularly on the upper neck, sometimes within the hairline of the lower, you know, the lower hairline by the neck area, many times on the breast or upper chest area. So keep in mind, you know, a lot of times I'll just ask my patients, you know, we have such an intimate relationship with our patients immediately when we're, you know, we're assessing them. It's not like you go up to a stranger on the street and you immediately touch their shoulder and listen to their heart rate, right? But you come into a medical clinic and that kind of level of intimacy and expectation of trust is already there. A lot of times I'll just ask my patient, hey, you know, that's kind of an interesting tattoo. Where'd you get that? You know, and so don't be shy to kind of make it part of the casual conversation, okay? And then noteworthy differential diagnoses. Is this a domestic violence situation, rape, sexual abuse, child abuse, homelessness, addiction? Identify the differential versus polyvictimization. So sometimes under that differential, noteworthy differential diagnoses, many times these things go in hand. Is there domestic violence? It's also going hand in hand with human trafficking. rape, child abuse, going hand in hand with human trafficking, addiction. So we need to keep all of those things in mind. So red flags. The biggest one here that I want to convey is the delay in seeking medical care. So many times these victims have issues going on for a long time. Dental problems, UTIs, broken bones, multiple issues, infections, bronchitis for weeks and weeks and weeks. I've had a cough for 6 months and a fever and I've been sick. A lot of times their traffickers will not allow them to seek out medical care without their permission, and only when they think it's absolutely necessary. Many of times these people will not have identification on them. Most of us, if we go into an ER or medical clinic, we might have a wallet or purse or something, that has our identification, some money, and our insurance card. Most of these people that present have none of those things. They just have the clothes on their back and, perhaps a few other smaller items. So I will let you go ahead and read through these at a later time here, just for purpose of time, because I want to get through some more of this meat and potatoes of the presentation, and we only have about 15 minutes left. So some common health issues: fatigue, headaches, chronic pain syndromes, bruising, scarring, broken bones that are healed improperly are often a key component of this. Many of times these people are underweight, they're malnourished, they have frequent history of multiple infections, particularly sexually transmitted infections, or infected wounds, vision and hearing impairment. They may not have the proper glasses. You think of the number of people that wear glasses and require, visual assistance. Many of times these people don't have anything, and that is also a component of the control. The dental thing, I cannot push that point to you more, that, dental issues are often the least important to these traffickers. And so if you have people coming in with multiple complaints or missing teeth or, poor dental care, that is kind of a big red flag there that we need to keep in mind. Is it really truly that they are negligent or that they just don't want to deal with it? Or, is that also a subdynamic with the drugs that are involved? Or is it that they are not allowed to get that taken care of? So internal, external victim dynamics. These are the components of vulnerability, and we talked about this a little bit already. The age of the victim, adverse child experiences. I don't know, just we'll throw a little caveat in there. If you have not, heard of the ACE study, the ACE study that was done by Kaiser Permanente, I would encourage you to go ahead on YouTube and Google that. There are several presentations that discuss adverse childhood experiences and how that kind of plays into long-term health care and risk for violence going forward. Developmental immaturity, so you might have this 15-year-old, 16-year-old presenting to your clinic that is not your typical 15 or 16-year-old. They might be, underweight, they might have improper answers to what you're saying, their vocabulary may be, below their grade level. Keep that in mind. Citizenship status, history of sexualization, substance abuse, prior family conflict, conflicts about their own sexual orientation. Many of times these young people, if they're brought into human sex trafficking at a young age, that's right at the age where we are kind of, forming our own identity, and they're never allowed to form their own identity. Mental health issues, history of family victimization in the past. They might have grown up in a home where, the mom, in many of the cases, was a victim of some form of violence. The dad, too, that happens, too. We can't forget that, but many a times it is the mom or whoever it was raising them was a victim of some form of violence. So reproductive health, common medical issues, the big one here that we see, particularly in emergency and urgent care, is, vaginal pain, vaginal bleeding, urinary tract infections, sexually transmitted infections, recurrent issues with unwanted pregnancy. You know, a lot of times there will be complications from repeated or poorly performed abortions. You might have that young woman coming into your clinic with abdominal pain, and she might not specify to you per se that she's had multiple abortions. So, you know, be sure that you assess that because many of times you can get a lot more information by asking the right questions. You know, delayed medical care, you see at the bottom there, and untreated pelvic inflammatory disease, those are really big components with regards to, you know, the delayed medical care for labor and sex trafficking, but, you know, obviously pelvic inflammatory disease in the sex trafficking victim. Developmental health, there are a lot of coexisting disparities here. You know, many of times these people are delayed in their, you know, cognition or their physical development, specifically these younger people that are taken in, you know, between that 11 to 14-year-old time frame. You know, they've had poor nutrition, they've been physically and emotionally abused for a long time, so there's a lot of stunting, vitamin deficiency, they may be underweight. The majority of human trafficking victims that I have actually directly encountered have been grossly underweight. And not necessarily dressed appropriately for the season. Long-term effects of inadequate treatment of childhood diseases. So, you know, for instance, did they lose hearing in one of their ears? Do you have this young person in their early 20s that, you know, can't hear, or they don't have their teeth? You know, those are typically things related to childhood diseases that might have not been treated properly. Mental health issues, many of them are withdrawn. They have this pathological fear, panic attacks. They might have this kind of dissociative, all over, you know, hyperactive way of relating to you. I can think of victims specifically that I have dealt with where it sounds literally like they are having a nervous breakdown, but they are trying to convey to you all of these sub-factors along with their fear as to what is going on. So try to be a calm presence. Try to take a moment and give them, these people require a lot of time. And in today's medical, you know, world, we don't have a lot of time necessarily because we have a lot of people that we have to see in a short period of time. So try to see, you know, if you are suspicious that this person is a human trafficking victim, try to do what you can to give them time. Get them settled. Get them something to eat. Get them something to drink. Do it in small doses. Perhaps go see some, you know, get them settled, go see some of your other patients, and then come back to this person. Because those short bursts of interaction help build trust, and that is going to be the key component to help to letting them involve you in their care, specifically when they have been taught to not trust law enforcement and to not trust medical providers. Life expectancy in commercial sex. So the epidemiologists have found that the average age of death for those involved in prostitution was 34 years old. So, you know, that's somewhere between a 15 and 20-year span when you are talking about young people getting wrapped up in human trafficking. Leading cause of death was homicide. That's 19%, and then drugs. There's also, you know, a lot of times, you know, we see this drugs is 18% here. You know, many of these people, because of their guilt and their emotional state and the psychological issues that come with it, there is a lot of overdosing and accidental suicide that happens here. You know, and then there's alcohol and HIV. Estimates are likely, you know, similar as related to, you know, other forms of human trafficking. So these, you know, the homicide, drugs, addiction, alcohol, etc., likely cross over into that labor trafficking form as well. So what to do? You know, you see this person in your emergency department or outpatient facility or primary care or dental clinic or what have you. Is there any sort of other issue going on with them, you know, when they come in with that, you know, abdominal pain or back pain or whatever? Does it look like they might have any marks of strangulation, head trauma, work exposure? You know, keep in mind, you know, anybody coming in with those complaints on an ambulance needs to be evaluated for being a human trafficking victim or a victim of violence. because a lot of times those victims will present with those issues. Check the labs, check sexually transmitted infections, pregnancy, forensic evidence collection. So that's, that is something that, is my particular involvement is the forensic evidence collection. But law enforcement can do this as well if you do not have that available at your clinic or outpatient facility. Document the ranges of their abuse. So even if they aren't coming out to you as a human trafficking victim, are they telling you things that, correlate with physical, mental, confinement levels of abuse? Do the head to toe, of course. Check, like I said, there's that dental concerns again, nutritional deficiencies. Are they underweight? Are they dirty? Are they not dressed appropriately for the season? So these are all red flags here. So these are some questions to ask. These are just very basic questions, and I will tell you that the majority of survivors will tell you, I was treated, this one particular one that I spoke with, she said, I was treated as a young girl 7 times for chlamydia throughout my high school years, and no one ever asked me once any of the right questions. And she said, I think if somebody had asked me, why do you think this is happening, or where are you sleeping, or who is it that you're with that, you think you might be getting this from? She said, if they had asked me the right questions, then I might have come out a lot sooner. So just basic questions here about livelihood, but then, about the basic freedoms that we had discussed. So I'll just let you have that there. Some more things of what to ask, what kind of work do you do? We're asking people these very intimate questions about, their personal health. I think, we need to take that very holistic approach of trying to get to know the person in a very short period of time. So have a few of these questions up your sleeve, particularly for that person that raises some red flags for you. Even if you are in a quick outpatient setting like an ER or an urgent care, or a dental clinic, small talk can actually really bridge a lot of gaps. So feel free to do that because you will get a lot more information that way than you would think. Here's some more questions. I gave you tons of questions, so just pick your top 5 perhaps that you feel is most pertinent to your work area, and just kind of memorize them and have them ready. So that when you encounter these situations, you already have an automatic set to go on. A lot of times we find these people that will present to the emergency department or urgent care clinics with these traffickers. I try to get people away. I have a line. So, oh, we have to go collect urine now. I'm sorry, sir or ma'am. I need to go with so-and-so with the patient into the room so I can show them how to do it properly. It's just our protocol. You're not allowed to come with them, or x-ray, or find a reason. Even if you might not be doing an x-ray, this might be something, to discuss with your department. Is it okay to fib and get this person alone and say, hey, we're taking her for x-ray right now, and maybe just take her down to x-ray and talk to her. Because if you can get them alone, you can get a lot more information. So assess for danger. Consider if the trafficker is present. We talked about that. If the person does not return to the trafficker, what happens to them? Are they going to really carry out that threat to go shoot up their family? Is their family in danger? Are they physically in danger? And then, of course, are medical staff in danger? And what do we need? How much do we need to involve law enforcement in protecting our facility as well as the victim? So doing your best, talk privately. Every patient should be screened separately from the person that brought them in. Only use the language line or a designated interpreter. Do not use a family member to interpret, because chances are, if it is a legitimate family member, they may not know the dynamics of what's going on. If it's not a legitimate family member, if it's the trafficker or someone affiliated with them, they may not tell you the whole story. And then limit the number of staff that are involved. The building trust component is huge here, and so you want to make sure that you do that as well. So reporting human trafficking is not a mandated report, but there are exceptions, okay? So if someone comes in and they are a victim of human trafficking and they are over the age of 18 and they do not want to report and they are of sound mind and body, that's a broad term there, other than, the physical needs that they have at that time, if they are a consenting adult of consensual age, they are not a mandated report. But, with regards to child abuse, certain types of sexual abuse, elder abuse, vulnerable populations, in Wyoming, we are all mandated reporters as citizens, and we need to keep that in mind, okay? So know your state protocol and what your local agencies want. And I know it's 1 o'clock. I have a couple more slides here. I'm going to try to get through them quickly because this is an important topic. Can I go ahead and finish this, Brenda?
Absolutely.
Are we doing okay?
Absolutely. I just want to do one thing. Thank you for joining us today, and do stay on if you can, because Tiffany's got a few more very important things she wants to share with you. We will also send out the evaluations to everyone who's joined today. We have emails, and so we'll take care of that. Look for that, and do appreciate your time to do that. And I'm going to turn it back to you, Tiffany.
Okay.
Continue on.
So what do you do if it's a case of a non-report? So educate and attempt to link the victim with resources. So a lot of times it takes multiple interactions to get these victims to actually finally report. Don't be surprised if you have, on your day off, you have somebody that you identified as a human trafficking victim coming in and asking for you specifically, and they will not see any other provider but you. A lot of times it will take that dynamic and that level of trust for them to come out. So just let them know what local services are available. Give them the national hotline number. I can't tell you how I've given quite a few people this hotline number and told them to stuff it in their sole of their shoe, and just say, just keep it there. No one will know that it's down there, that inner part of your shoe where, it lifts up. Tell them about shelter, safety planning. Discuss with them what is available in your community for, medical care, dental care, legal assistance. Discuss what law enforcement resources are available. So there's a case study on here, which is presented by a survivor herself, who then now works in human trafficking victims services as an advocate. Her name is Joyce. It's a wonderful, wonderful video. It's very short. I would encourage you to jot this link down. It seems like our linking isn't quite working anyway, but just for the sake of time, I will just leave that to you because it really is very touching to hear the broad spectrum of what happens to a victim, and this is a different story than what the other victim's story was in this presentation as well. So discussion, what can we learn from, from understanding human trafficking? What are the best practices? And, just a few takeaways to kind of discuss here. So know your resources. Okay, know what's available in your community, and the fact that you took the time to come on here today, I think it's really a great encouragement, for all of us involved to know that so many people showed so much interest. Know your resources and know what's available at your local community centers. Know the process of what happens if you do refer someone to the emergency room or to the forensic team. What does that look like for you as a referring provider, and what are the follow-up things that are involved? Contact information for these resources. Perhaps put together a brief card for your organization to hand to victims. I know at Cheyenne Regional Forensic Nursing we actually have a little resource card that has the national hotline number. It has some key questions to ask yourself as the victim. Do I have certain freedoms? Am I allowed to do what I need to do? Things like that to kind of help the victim self-identify at a later time if they aren't ready to do that at that time. Establish, a working relationship with your law enforcement, with your local providers. Refer to protocols that are already existing. So if you don't have a protocol for your clinic, go ahead and put one together. I can tell you that having that in place when you are in this particular situation of having a victim in front of you really does help a lot. So what do you do if the victim refuses to go to the referral or follow-up? Just provide some comprehensive management to arrange a follow-up for them. If they don't show, try to provide a non-judgmental environment. You know, they probably have very good reason for not showing up, and I know many of us get very frustrated. You know, we go to the extent of trying to set up a referral and people don't show up, and just the fact that they knew that you were willing to help them may make them reappear again. Or on follow-up, they might be willing to receive a different type of assistance. You know, if you can get them back into the clinic and the first time they came, they didn't want to involve law enforcement, perhaps the second time they will. So it takes a few times sometimes, and it takes patience and time, like I said, which, you know, a lot of us don't have, but try to figure out in your protocols what you can do to make time. You know, referral with no follow-up. The biggest thing that I try to do for the victims that I see that refuse to follow up, tell me that, you know, you're likely not going to see me again. I'm going to be in a car on the way somewhere else tomorrow. Just make sure that they know what resources are typically available in certain communities, where a safe place to go is. You know, I kind of, as a, you know, an all-over caveat here, I just tell people, if you are afraid, if you do not know where to go, just go to the ER. Wherever you are, just go to the ER, because the ER is a little less threatening to them than the police station. The ER can involve the police as needed, and, you know, that can help. Or tell them, go to the urgent care, you know, walk in a doctor's office. I mean, you know, try to convey to them that medical providers are there to help them to the best extent that we can, and hopefully that will help them even if they are no longer in our community. So urgency might be due to imminent danger. So first, assess your own safety. So first, you know, if your victim is telling you, you know, I'm ready to report, but he knows I'm here in the hospital, or he knows I'm at the clinic, and the minute I go outside, I know he's sitting out there, he's going to grab me and he might kill me. So assess your own safety first, okay? We can't do anything for our victims if we are, you know, we are then to become a victim at that time. So figure out how you can fortify your clinic or hospital or, you know, outpatient, what have you, to provide safety for yourself as well as the victim. You know, if you are seeing a lot of these cases, perhaps you might want to touch base with law enforcement and maybe have a protocol with them. Document information, you know, as needed. Based on clinical assessment, does the patient need to be referred to the emergency room? Remember, the medical piece for all of us providers is stabilizing them medically first. If there's evidence later, if there's forensic stuff that needs to be followed up with law enforcement, with forensic nursing, that goes out the window if your patient has no, you know, has a compromised airway or has risk of bleeding or has, you know, possibly traumatic injury. You know, we have to think of our, you know, ABCs first, okay? And that is sometimes difficult to do, and I will tell you, you know, that is something I have to reorient myself to sometimes as well, because our different roles as providers carry different priorities in our own jurisdiction, and so we need to make sure we are medically stabilizing them first. Is the patient alone? Do they need assistance contacting someone? If so, make sure that this is the preferred course of action, and, you know, document, because if this is a situation where they are going to come out, we want to make sure we have all of the correct evidence there to support the victim in their legal stance as well. So today's overview, I hope that I was able to give you a better understanding of human trafficking. Consider the risk of human trafficking in each of the patients that you see, how to recognize them, how to act accordingly if necessary, and how to support your victim. So in summary, define your challenges. Do you have protocols in place? I can't stress this enough. Is there a protocol or a game plan in place that if you have someone in there who's throwing up the red flags left and right, what are you going to do? What questions are you going to ask? Do you know your resources? I'm sure most of you do know your resources, but what are your resources if you cannot involve law enforcement? Sometimes these victims will not allow that. Majority of the time they will not. But what can you do to help them get medically stabilized? What can you do to encourage them to involve law enforcement without coercing them to involve law enforcement? So what can you do to kind of help them get to where they need to be? Set realistic expectations. This can be so frustrating. I mean, you know, it's very difficult when you've worked with someone for many, many hours who is a victim of human trafficking. You've gotten them to a safe place, and then you find out several weeks later that they were roped back in. So set realistic expectations. What is available for outreach in the community to build what you need? And what can you do to help yourself not get too frustrated, you know, with regards to how to help these people? And keep an eye on your goal, okay? The goal is to increase detection and understanding, increase services, and increase community collaboration, and as medical providers, to increase the chances for better health for the people that we see, and certainly assessing you know, people at risk for human trafficking, and educating our patients is the best way to do that, of course. So the starfish story, making a difference. This is a beautiful story here. I can certainly play the audio on it.
You can play that.
I wanted to try to leave you with a positive note because certainly when it comes to human trafficking, there's the link there if you want to watch the video. It's just a bunch of beach scenes, but the audio is the most important. With regards to human trafficking, you know, we are intervening pretty much one individual at a time. And, you know, to make a difference, it is one person, one patient, one victim at a time. And you can be that provider to help make the difference for that one person, even if all the people that you've assessed have not come out as human trafficking victims and you've not made any progress. If you were able to help one person, it was that person that you made the difference for. So I'm going to go ahead and play this for you, and then we'll take any questions at the end here.
Once upon a time, there was a wise man who took his morning walks at the seashore. One day after a storm...
So what we're actually going to do, Tiffany, we're on, that's okay, is we've asked them to post their questions in the chat box, and I'll send them to you and Kara to answer.
Okay, excellent.
So with that, everyone, we so appreciate you joining us today. We know we ran a little long, but most of you chose to stay on. That shows the importance of this topic. I encourage you to join us on June 28th, and we're going to talk about diabetes. We're going to change the topic just a little bit, but that's how it goes. Thanks so much, everyone, and we're going to sign off now.
Don't you realize that there are miles and miles of beach and hundreds of starfish all along it? You cannot possibly make a difference.
Where do I go, Kathy?
The young woman listened politely.
Yeah, you don't want to finish the
and
last
then
part.
bent down,
Yeah.
picked up another starfish, and threw it into the sea, saying,